While meteorologists with billion-dollar radar systems struggle to predict tornadoes more than 13 minutes ahead, Native American tribes consistently knew exactly when and where they'd strike a full day before they formed. No satellites, no computers, no weather stations, yet they were never wrong. How is that even possible? Long before Doppler radar existed, Native American tribes had their own early warning system that could spot trouble brewing up to 24 hours ahead. And it wasn't some mystical mumbo-jumbo either. It was pure observation science that would make your weatherman jealous. Their secret weapon? Animals. You know how your dog acts weird before a thunderstorm hits? Well, Native Americans turned this into an art form. They watched every creature like their lives depended on it. Because, frankly, they did. Dogs would pace nervously, whimpering for no apparent reason. Cattle became skittish, clustering together like nervous teenagers at a school dance. Horses refused to graze, ears constantly twitching toward the horizon. But here's where it gets really interesting. These behavioral changes happened way before any visible signs appeared in the sky. Birds were the real MVPs of this system, though. Normally, chatty songbirds would go completely silent as if someone hit nature's mute button. Hawks and eagles, usually masters of riding air currents, would suddenly refuse to fly. Even more telling, flocks would abandon their usual flight patterns, heading for shelter with an urgency that screamed, "Something's coming." The silence was perhaps the most unnerving part. When you're used to constant bird chatter, sudden quiet feels downright spooky. Tribal elders knew this eerie calm meant business, the kind of business that could flatten entire villages. Modern science has actually backed up these ancient observations. Turns out animals can sense barometric pressure changes that our human senses completely miss. They're essentially living, breathing weather instruments with fur and feathers. Dogs, for instance, can detect pressure drops of just a few millibars, changes so subtle that even sensitive people might only feel a slight headache. But to a dog, it's like someone cranked up a fire alarm. What made Native American observation so brilliant was their systematic approach. They didn't just notice one anxious cow and panic. Instead, they looked for patterns across multiple species. When the dogs, cattle, birds, and even insects all started acting strange simultaneously, that's when they knew Mother Nature was cooking up something serious. The accuracy rate was surprisingly high, too. Some tribal weather watchers could predict severe storms with success rates that would make today's meteorologists nod with respect. Not bad for people who thought smartphones were some kind of sorcery, but animals were just the first piece of their weather predicting puzzle. These observations gave tribes nearly a full day's head. Start, enough time to secure belongings, move to safer ground, or batten down for the storm ahead. The real genius wasn't just watching animals act weird, though. It was understanding what came next in nature's warning sequence. Because once the animal kingdom started sounding its alarm bells, Native Americans knew exactly where to look for the next set of clues brewing overhead. While animals gave the first hints, Native Americans knew the sky held even bigger secrets. They became master cloud readers, studying formations like meteorologists study radar screens today. But here's the kicker. They were often more accurate than your local weather guy who still can't get Tuesday's forecast right. The real pros could spot trouble brewing from miles away. Massive, towering clouds that seemed to scrape the heavens weren't just impressive, they were nature's warning flags. These weren't your average puffy white clouds that look like bunny rabbits. We're talking about dark, menacing giants that rose like skyscrapers made of vapor. But the most telling sign? That eerie green tint in the sky that made everything look like an old television with bad color settings. When experienced tribal weather watchers saw this greenish hue, they knew Mother Nature was about to throw a tantrum. Modern science now confirms this phenomenon happens when sunlight filters through dense ice particles in severe storm clouds. Pretty smart for folks without meteorology degrees, wouldn't you say? Cloud shapes told stories, too. Funnel-shaped formations weren't just interesting to look at, they were screaming, "Get to safety now!" The elders taught younger generations to recognize these rotating wall clouds that often preceded tornadoes. Think of it like reading smoke signals, except the sky was sending the message. Then, there's the matter of cloud movement. Experienced observers noticed when clouds started rotating or moving in unusual patterns. Normal clouds drift lazily across the sky like they're on vacation. Storm clouds move with purpose. sometimes spinning like nature's own washing machine gone haywire. The challenge was distinguishing between scary-looking but harmless clouds and the real deal. Not every dark cloud meant tornado trouble. Sometimes a storm cloud is just having a bad hair day without any intention of destroying your village. This is where years of experience separated the amateur sky watchers from the experts. Different tribes developed their own cloud reading techniques based on local geography. Plains tribes had unobstructed views that let them spot storms from incredible distances, sometimes up to 50 miles away. It was like having nature's own early warning system, except it never needed software updates. Weather prediction wasn't just about individual clouds either. The overall sky color, the way light filtered through different layers, and even the clarity of distant mountains all provided clues. A crystal clear view of far off. Peaks sometimes meant high pressure, good weather ahead. Hazy, unclear, distant views often signaled approaching storms. The accuracy of these methods impressed even early European settlers who initially dismissed native weather knowledge as superstition. Turns out, generations of survival-dependent observation beats guesswork every single time. While cloud reading gave crucial visual warnings, the most subtle prediction method involves something you couldn't see at all: the invisible forces of air pressure that even today's meteorologists rely on heavily. The wind tells stories if you know how to listen. Native Americans understood this better than anyone, turning every breeze into a weather report that would make modern meteorologists jealous. Picture trying to predict a tornado by sticking your finger in the air. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, these folks made it work like a charm. They noticed something fascinating. Winds don't just blow randomly before a big storm hits. They follow patterns more predictable than your uncle's golf stories at family dinner. Here's where it gets interesting. About 12 to 24 hours before a tornado touched down, experienced tribal weather watchers would feel the wind doing something peculiar. It would shift directions, not just once, but in a specific sequence that spelled trouble with a capital T. The Plains tribes, living under those massive prairie skies, became absolute masters at reading these wind changes. They'd notice the morning breeze coming from the south, then gradually shifting to the southwest by afternoon. But here's the kicker. When it suddenly switched to the northwest and started picking up speed, that was nature's way of saying, batten down the hatches. Then came the eerie part. After all that shifting and building, the wind would sometimes just stop. Dead calm, like nature itself was holding its breath before unleashing hell. One Cherokee elder described it as the moment when even the grass stops whispering. Talk about poetic weather forecasting. This wasn't just guesswork either. The Lakota had a saying that roughly translates to, when the four winds argue, the sky will dance angrily. They understood that conflicting air masses create the perfect recipe for rotating storms. Modern meteorology calls this wind shear, but these tribes figured it out centuries before anyone invented the term. But wait, there's more to this wind-reading wizardry. Some tribes could actually feel the wind's texture change. Experienced observers claimed the air felt thicker or heavier before severe weather. Sounds crazy until you realize they were detecting increased humidity and atmospheric pressure changes through their skin. Your body makes a pretty decent barometer when you know what to look for. The Osage tribe took wind observation to another level. They'd watch how dust and debris moved across the plains. When small whirlwinds started forming in areas that usually stayed calm, they knew something big was brewing. These weren't tornadoes yet, just the atmosphere's way of practicing its dance moves before the main performance. Different regions developed their own wind-reading techniques based on local geography. Mountain tribes watched how winds moved through valleys, while plains dwellers had the luxury of observing unobstructed air currents for miles. What made these predictions so reliable was the combination factor. Smart observers never relied on wind patterns alone. They'd cross-reference what the air was doing with other natural signs, creating a comprehensive forecast system that rarely let them down. But the real genius wasn't just in reading the wind, it was in understanding what the animals were doing when those wind patterns started shifting. Native Americans didn't have barometers, but they sure didn't need them. Their bodies became living weather stations, tuned to detect the slightest changes in air pressure that modern folks completely miss. You know that feeling when you're in an elevator going up a tall building and your ears pop? Well, imagine being so sensitive to pressure changes that you could feel a tornado coming from 24 hours away. That's exactly what many tribal weather watchers developed over generations of survival. But here's where it gets fascinating. These pressure drops weren't just subtle hints. They were like nature's alarm clock going off. Experienced native observers would literally feel their bodies responding to atmospheric changes, headaches, joint aches, even changes in how food tasted. Sounds crazy? Modern science backs this up completely. The human body contains tiny air pockets in joints, sinuses, and inner ears. When barometric pressure drops rapidly, which happens before severe storms, these air pockets expand. It's like having dozens of tiny pressure gauges built right into your skeleton. Some tribal elders became so accurate they could predict not just when storms were coming, but how severe they'd be based on the intensity of their physical symptoms. Then there's the breathing factor that most people never consider. Lower air pressure means less oxygen per breath. Alert native weather watchers noticed they'd start breathing slightly deeper or faster without even realizing it. Their bodies were compensating for the atmospheric change before their minds caught up. Makes sense, right? After all, we're basically walking barometers ourselves. Well, the really clever part was how they distinguished between regular weather changes and tornado-level pressure drops. Regular storms cause gradual pressure changes over several hours. But tornado conditions? The pressure would plummet like a rock dropped in water. Veterans could feel the difference the same way you'd notice the difference between walking up a gentle hill versus climbing a steep staircase. And the weird part is, they weren't just feeling current pressure. They were detecting the rate of change. A slow, steady drop meant rain. A sudden, dramatic plunge meant serious trouble was brewing. It's like their bodies had built-in calculus computers measuring atmospheric derivatives. Some tribes developed communal pressure reading systems. Multiple experienced weather watchers would compare notes about their physical sensations. If 3 or 4 elders all reported the same intense pressure symptoms simultaneously, the entire village went into storm preparation mode immediately. Of course, this method had its limitations. Older folks with arthritis might cry wolf during regular weather changes. Younger people often lacked the sensitivity that came with decades of practice. Plus, other medical conditions could throw off readings completely. But when experienced practitioners used pressure sensing alongside their other techniques, the accuracy rates were remarkable. Modern meteorologists still marvel at how these human barometers could detect pressure changes that required sensitive instruments to measure. Now, different tribes didn't just rely on individual sensations. Different tribes developed completely unique approaches to tornado prediction. And honestly, it makes perfect sense when you think about it. A Lakota warrior scanning the endless Dakota plains had totally different weather clues than a Cherokee farmer in the Tennessee valleys. Like asking a surfer and a mountain climber to describe dangerous weather. They're both experts, but they're reading completely different books. The Plains tribes had it made for tornado watching. Picture having a 360-degree view with 0 trees blocking your sightlines. These folks could spot rotating clouds from miles away, watching them build like nature's own skyscrapers. The Cheyenne developed an intricate system of smoke signals that could relay storm warnings across vast distances faster than a Pony Express rider. Makes sense, right? But here's where it gets interesting. Coastal tribes like the Seminoles had to play a trickier game. Their storms came loaded with different signatures, saltwater mist mixing with inland pressure changes, creating warning signs that would baffle a Plains Indian. They learned to read the behavior of pelicans and seagulls, birds that could sense barometric shifts over water hours before landfall. Well, the Cherokee had perhaps the most sophisticated system of all. Living in mountainous terrain meant they couldn't see storms coming from great distances. Instead, they became masters of microclimate detection. Elder weather watchers could predict severe storms by observing how mist clung to ridgelines or how certain flowers closed their petals. Talk about reading nature's fine print. Then there's the fascinating case of desert tribes. The Hopi and Navajo faced the challenge of predicting storms in areas where tornadoes were rare but devastatingly powerful when they occurred. They developed techniques focusing on dust devil behavior and wind pattern changes that modern meteorologists are only now beginning to understand. These tiny whirlwinds apparently served as early warning systems for their much larger, dangerous cousins. And the weird part is how accurate these regional methods became over generations. A study from the 1970s found that tribal weather predictions in specific geographic areas often matched or exceeded early weather service accuracy rates. Not bad for people working without satellites or computer models. The diversity of these techniques tells us something profound about human adaptability. Each tribe essentially became specialized meteorologists for their particular patch of Earth. Like having custom-built weather apps designed specifically for your backyard, except these apps were human brains trained over centuries. What's remarkable is how these different approaches shared common threads. Animal behavior observation, atmospheric pressure sensitivity, and wind pattern recognition appeared across all regions. The execution varied wildly, but the fundamental principles remained surprisingly consistent. But here's what really blows my mind about all this regional expertise. When we examine just how accurate these traditional methods actually were, the results might surprise even the biggest skeptics. Here's the million-dollar question that probably keeps meteorologists up at night. Just how good were these ancient forecasting methods? Well, buckle up, because the answer might surprise you more than finding out your weatherman was wrong again. Native American tornado prediction wasn't just lucky guessing. These techniques worked well enough that entire tribes survived on the Great Plains for centuries without getting wiped out by surprise storms. That's like passing a 1,000-year weather exam without a single textbook. Modern researchers have actually gone back and tested some of these methods. Turns out animal behavior changes can predict severe weather with accuracy rates between 60 and 80%. Not bad for a system that doesn't require satellites or Doppler radar, right? Your local TV meteorologist wishes they could hit those numbers consistently. But here's where it gets interesting. The success of these warnings depended heavily on experience and observation skills. A seasoned tribal elder who'd been watching storms for 40 years could read nature's signals like we read text messages. Meanwhile, a younger person might miss crucial signs entirely. The Plains tribes had particular success because their environment was perfect for this kind of forecasting. Wide open spaces meant they could see weather systems approaching from miles away. It's like having front row seats to nature's own weather theater, complete with all the dramatic cloud formations and wind changes you could want. However, let's be honest about the limitations. These methods weren't foolproof. Sometimes animals act strange for reasons that have nothing to do with tornadoes. Maybe the neighbor's dog is just having an off day, not predicting the next big storm. One fascinating detail from historical accounts: some tribes achieved warning times of up to 24 hours before major storms hit. Compare that to modern tornado watches, which typically give us about 13 minutes of actual warning time. Makes you wonder who really had the better system, doesn't it? The key was combining multiple indicators rather than relying on just one sign. Smart tribes didn't pack up and leave just because a few birds went quiet. They waited for the full package: restless animals, pressure changes, shifting winds, and ominous cloud formations all happening together. Here's something that'll knock your socks off. Recent studies show that in certain conditions, these traditional methods actually outperformed early 20th century meteorological instruments. The human eye, trained through generations of survival necessity, could sometimes spot trouble before primitive weather equipment even registered a blip. Of course, nobody's suggesting we throw away our modern weather technology and go back to watching cows all day. But there's definitely something to be said for the accuracy these ancient observers achieved. And speaking of modern technology, wait until you hear how today's scientists are actually incorporating some of these traditional methods into current forecasting systems. Well, here's the fascinating thing about those Native American tornado watching techniques. They weren't just old wives' tales after all. Modern meteorologists have spent decades studying severe weather patterns only to discover that tribal observers got most of it right. Like my grandfather used to say about his ancient toolbox, just because it's old doesn't mean it's obsolete. Take animal behavior, for instance. Scientists now understand that animals can detect infrasound, those ultra-low frequency sound waves that tornadoes produce hours before they form. Dogs going crazy, cattle huddling together, that's not superstition talking. That's biology responding to pressure waves we can't even hear. Makes you wonder who the real weather experts were, right? But here's where things get really interesting. Those eerie green skies that tribes watched for, turns out they happen when storm clouds filter sunlight through massive hailstones. The bigger the hail, the greener the glow. Modern Doppler radar can detect this phenomenon, but it took scientists until the 1980s to figure out what Native Americans knew centuries ago. Then there's the whole pressure change thing. Weather stations now use sophisticated barometers to measure atmospheric pressure drops. But tribal weather watchers felt these changes in their bones. Literally. Joint aches, headaches, that weird feeling in your ears, all legitimate responses to barometric pressure shifts that precede severe storms. And the weird part is, we're still learning from them. The National Weather Service has started incorporating traditional ecological knowledge into their forecasting models. Some meteorologists now study how different animals behave before storms hit. It's like watching your smartphone learn tricks from a rotary phone. Regional tribal techniques have proven especially valuable. Plains tribes developed methods for reading wind shear patterns that modern meteorology didn't fully understand until computer modeling advanced in the 2000s. Their observations about rotating wall clouds and hook echoes, terminology they didn't use, obviously, matched what we now see on radar screens. Let's not forget the human element, though. While satellites can spot tornado signatures from space, they can't replace the intuitive understanding that comes from living intimately with the land. Native weather watchers developed what scientists call situational awareness, the ability to synthesize multiple environmental cues into accurate predictions. The real breakthrough came when meteorologists stopped dismissing traditional knowledge and started documenting it. Suddenly, patterns emerged. Success rates that seemed impossibly high for primitive methods started making sense when viewed through the lens of modern atmospheric science. Today's tornado warnings combine satellite imagery, Doppler radar, computer models, and yes, animal behavior monitoring. Some storm chasers carry barometers and watch for the same cloud formations that tribal observers tracked. We've essentially created a high-tech version of what Native Americans did naturally. The lesson? Sometimes the best innovation isn't inventing something new. It's finally understanding why something old actually worked all along.